Former Nalcor CEO Ed Martin was entitled to a $1.4 million severance payout because he was pushed out of his job by the Liberal government. That was a finding today in a report by Auditor General Terry Padden on the Ed Martin severance scandal. NTV's Michael Connors joins us live tonight with more on that. Michael?
Thank you very much, Glenn. Auditor General Terry Padden says he found no evidence that Premier Dwight Ball intentionally misled the public. But he says the Premier failed to find out the details of Ed Martin's contract before letting him go.
Time frame is working toward.
Terry Padden's report on Ed Martin took months longer than expected, but it was finally made public today. Martin stepped down as CEO of Nalcor on April 20th last year. Padden says it was a result of constructive dismissal, and therefore Martin was entitled to the $1.4 million he received in severance pay.
And ultimately, constructive dismissal is dismissal.
It all started when Finance Minister CATHY BENNETT criticized Nalcor in her budget speech on April 14th.
For all corporations and their shareholders, this would be unacceptable.
3 days later, Martin met with Premier Dwight Ball, stating he would stay on only if the Premier gave him a public vote of confidence. The Premier would not do that. Stan Marshall agreed to become the new CEO of Nalcor the next day, but in the interim, government officials did nothing to find out about the financial consequences of Martin's departure. The Premier and Martin met again on April 19th. They understood that his contract would have to be dealt with, but there was no discussion of specific dollar amounts. Terry Padden says all of these events were tantamount to constructive dismissal by the government.
The wording in the budget speech was probably the most critical thing, or one of the most critical things, but then it was the follow-up after the budget, the questions by the media, and the lack of endorsement or public support.
But it was the Nalcor Board of Directors that had to terminate Martin's contract. Padden found there was no communication from the province to the board about the outcome of the April 19th meeting. There was a telephone conversation between the Premier and the chair of the board, but there are different memories about how specific it was. The board resigned immediately after terminating Martin. Premier Ball insisted last spring that he did not find out about the details of Martin's $1.4 million severance until weeks later on May 5th. On that count, Padden says the Premier did not mislead the public.
I haven't seen any evidence along that line. My mandate was really just to determine whether the severance was appropriate, and that's what I've done. There's certainly no evidence that the Premier was aware of what was in the contract.
But Padden says the Premier should have done more to find out the exact terms of Martin's contract before letting him go.
Perhaps the issue of not seeking advice or some assessment of what had transpired at the meeting on the 17th and looking at what the contract provisions were probably could have shed more light in terms of the decision-making process.
Now, Premier Dwight Ball did issue a statement today saying that the AG's report confirms the information he released last spring. It's expected the Premier will have more to say about this tomorrow. Meanwhile, Terry Padden says he's now begun a larger audit of Nalcor itself, and he expects that audit may be done sometime in May. Glenn?
Michael Connors joining us live. Thank you, Michael.